Samantha Maiden caused a bit of a stir with this one.
It's a hit piece.
Just for the record, I've got no issue whatsoever with our Prime Minister's financial interests being reported on, nor the opposition leaders or any of our other elected officials for that matter. I've seen a lot of comments on social media going down the what about path or but yeah, why didn't you do this when the other team were in power? I mean, the other obvious reason is that Scott Morrison, as far as I can tell, has never really owned more than one property at a time. But that aside, both those lines of thinking, I feel anyway, miss the point. But we'll have a look at some of them in a bit anyway. Where this one crosses over the line for me from reporting on something that really should be okay to report on into hit piece territory is the language that's used. Landlord Anthony Albanese is raking in $115,000 a year in rental income on top of his salary as Prime Minister as interest rates soar for struggling families. Then there's the focus on the property empire. I admit it, initially I just skimmed the headline and my initial reaction was, what the
Crikey dingo.
How? That sounds sus. Once I'd simmered down though and actually read the thing, I was still asking what the
Crikey dingo.
Only this time I was asking myself, what the
Crikey dingo.
was all the fuss about? Why was this a story? There's really not much to this story at all. So,
Here's some fun facts.
the facts behind the inflammatory headline and narrative. The PM currently owns 2 residential properties. One a home in Marrickville that he'd been living in up until he became PM. The second a home in Dulwich Hill, an investment property he's owned for many years and is still paying a mortgage on. There are no family trusts, there are no holding companies, there's no directorships or partnerships. He currently owns 2 residential properties. Now for me, that's not meeting my definition of an empire. Let's face it, for most of us, $115,000 a year probably sounds like a lot.
Are you high?
I mean, it is a lot. But when one of the properties is a former family home with a pool in Marrickville, $1,350 rent per week is pretty much par for the course there. Collecting over $800 per week on the second property, and that puts you in the $115,000 per year ballpark. Apparently in some areas of Sydney it's quite easy to run up a steep rental bill. The thing is, it's all declared, it's all out there in the open. His ownership is not hidden behind trusts and holding companies. He's never hidden the fact that he's owned property.
Yes, I have a home I live in Sydney and one in Canberra, and I have an investment property.
So what's the big deal? While the headline and the opening do a decent job of stirring up some drama, there really is no bombshell revelation here.
There isn't. There totally isn't.
What's interesting for me is, and allow me to put on my tinfoil hat here for a second, the vague hint of coordination that I sensed. The opposition leader tried to reposition the coalition as more representative of the working class.
We are the parties of the Australian working class.
Then this story drops that presents the PM as some kind of property tycoon, which is enough to get a little traction, and then the seagulls on Sky poke their beaks in.
I don't like having a crack at the Prime Minister for his salary. He doesn't set his salary. There's not many things that he makes choices about in terms of his remuneration. It's set by an independent tribunal. But what he does make a choice about is renting out the home that he was living in now that he's living in Kirribilli House and the Lodge. And we know today, we learned from the media, he's renting it out for over $100,000.
Can we fact check this, please?
Per annum. Now, everyone's being squeezed at the moment right across the country.
It does feel a little bit uncomfortable. He does have a bit of a property portfolio.
I need to check some facts and figures.
It is just a bit on the nose, I think.
You are, but what am I? No, you are, but what am I?
For somebody who talks about battlers and fighting Tories and all of that, to have, that sort of, fairly Tory property portfolio and rents.
Yeah, but what about...
Yeah, the opposition leader. I've covered that before, but here's another taste.
Peter Dutton has built his own wealth in real estate. In the past 30 years, he's wholly or partly owned and sold at least 21 properties in Queensland, including childcare and shopping centres, and a $6 million home in part of the Gold Coast known as Millionaires Row. He currently owns a $3 million Brisbane luxury apartment and a cattle farm. You are a very wealthy individual. You don't talk about that much.
Well, first point, I think that's overstated.
Based on his register of interests, Dutton's been buying and selling property like he's been doing the rounds of a monopoly board.
So play Monopoly. Do not pass go. Go directly to McDonald's.
Dutton's property portfolio has attracted attention in the past. His interests in childcare centres have caught media attention a couple of times in his political career. There was also that time where he had a memory failure and he forgot to declare $1 million commercial property. I mean, hands up, who among us hasn't forgotten they owned $1 million property at least once in our lives?
Bueller.
There's no doubt Dutton has been active in the property market. But when you're handed the directorship of the family trust at the age of 22, you can hardly describe yourself as a self-made man. Can you? A trust or holding company is a great way to declare you have interests without having to go into any real detail. Kind of looks to me like the ideal way of masking your actual wealth, if that's what you're trying to do. MPs are required to declare their company's shareholdings, trusts and self-managed super funds. But they are not explicitly obliged to detail any of the investments made by those companies' trusts or self-managed super funds. This makes it very, very easy to hide any property interests. It also makes the declaration of interest process a little less transparent than we might expect. All the way back in 2017, the Sydney Morning Herald reported that politicians were using family trusts at 10 times the rate of ordinary Australians. Back then, MPs were only voluntarily disclosing their trust or company holdings if they felt like it. Many didn't, citing Department of Finance advice they didn't need to. Unless I've missed something in the past few years, I don't believe that situation has changed. So essentially, they can set up a trust, company or self-managed super fund and hide their buying and selling of property behind that. Clever, not transparent at all, but clever. There are plenty of pollies from both teams that have a significantly larger portfolio than our PM.
Minister, thanks for your time tonight. Pleasure.
Karen Andrews has a whole heap of property. Tony Burke looks like a real fan of Monopoly. The Govern Me Harder guy has a ton of shareholdings, not to mention property. And then there's Michelle Rowland, who has a confusing array of properties, some of which look tied to a trust, maybe.
Well, what about the other guys?
This whole, but you didn't do this when the other team were in power angle is a bit of a furphy as well. It's kind of where perception and reality diverge. The politician and the property story is one that gets rolled out regularly.
No, nothing like a pickle. Like a pickle.
Either when there's a vague whiff of a scandal.
Day by day, we get a clearer look at the cost of Susan Lee's love affair with the Gold Coast. It's increasingly likely to both finish her ministerial career
5 years later.
I thank the Liberal Party room for the great honour of being elected Deputy Leader.
22 taxpayer-funded trips to the Gold Coast in 3.5 years. Cost almost $65,000. She had claimed the apartment she bought during one trip was a last-minute decision.
The purchase of this particular property was neither planned nor anticipated.
But now this. Pictures of another Gold Coast property she apparently offered to buy 9 months earlier, while on another of those taxpayer-funded trips.
Oh my!
Or when the media are trying to out an Aussie battler as a corporate fat cat.
For somebody who talks about battlers and fighting Tories and all of that, to have, that sort of, fairly Tory property portfolio and rents.
Look, there are legitimate criticisms you could level at the government. The apparent laissez-faire approach to integrity that's popped up this week after going so hard on integrity during the election campaign being a prime example.
Anthony Albanese is facing calls to sack his Communications Minister Michelle Rowland after she received $19,000 in donations from Sportsbet on the eve of last year's federal election. The donations have raised concerns about a potential conflict of interest as she now has responsibility for regulating online gambling.
The optics are terrible.
But I'm not sure focusing on two fairly standard residential properties that the PM owns and has chosen to rent out is really one of them.
Yeah, it's not.